This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnik. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio, episode 746. This week we welcome S700 Consensus Body Chair Bran Lynch, Vice Chair John Pletcher, Restoration Renaissance man Mark Springer, and Consensus Board member Cliff Zlotnik. We also want to welcome special guest host Rusty Amarante for a look behind the scenes at the development of the ANSI IICRC S700 Standard for fire and smoke damage restoration. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are AIHA, the American Industrial Hygiene Association at AIHA.org. IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at EIA-USA.org. Actionable Insights at getinsights.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com. Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnik at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Good. Congratulations go out to Kurt Johnson, Fresh Air Ventilation in Gray, Maine, who was first to identify 1972 as the year the Clean Air Act was established. Here's today's IAQ Radio trivia question. Name the founder of the organization which is now known as the IICRC. Back to you, Joe.
All right. Let's get these intros. Bran Lynch has been in the property restoration business for over 25 years, happy to be known as a utility player within Belfour. He has worked as everything from a warehouse helper to senior project manager to expert witness, and he is the S700 chair of the Consensus Body and has been on that body for the duration of the S700 development, which is quite a while. John Pletcher has 40 years in the disaster restoration industry. He's the owner and operator of Restortech in Herndon, Virginia for 34 years now. He's the vice chair of the S700, and John was the RIA Martin King Award winner, or Martin L King Award winner in 2022. Mark Springer is highly regarded and experienced president, CEO, skilled in successfully expanding a multi-location residential and commercial services company across a broad geographical region. He's a RIA past president, and he was instrumental in helping IICRC and RIA coordinate together to put this standard together. And Cliff Zlotnik needs no introduction, and today's co-host is Rusty Amarante, president at Belfour Franchise Group. I hope I got everybody right there. Welcome on board, everyone. Cliff, let me start, I guess, with Rusty. Let me turn it over to you.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, obviously, John, Bran, Cliff, and I know there's a ton of other people, but congratulations here on getting this to where it is, and you guys obviously have been working tirelessly for many years to make this happen. And I'm thinking maybe, Cliff, just for everyone listening in, just to kind of give a little background and foundation, you want to maybe start off by just talking a little bit about the history, of the S700.
Sure. It was tireless, Rusty, but it wasn't painless. Okay. There was some heartburn along the way, but I heard. Yeah. Right. In any event, the predecessor documents to the S700 standard began with a document back in 1997. This document was called Knitter Guidelines for Fire and Smoke Damage Repair, came out in 1997 under the auspices of the National Institute of Disaster Restoration. And it was written entirely by Martin King. It was 135 pages. And that first edition answered hundreds of questions regarding recommended fire and smoke damage practices and procedures. So Marty wrote this document without any input. He was contracted to do it and did really a good job. Then it was decided that the document was going to be revised. So in 2002, the second edition came out. The difference with the second edition is the second edition was peer reviewed. It actually had comments, from many people. There were 300 reviewers, and besides being revised, it was expanded. It was updated with a more extensive glossary and index. What happened was at that time, I'm sure you'll remember Bill Lakin and some of our members that we had over in the UK. They felt that they needed an anglicized version of it because we're talking about the EPA or FEMA or something like that, and they don't have those same organizations in their country, or they do, but they have different names and so on and so forth. So what Bill Lakin did is he took upon himself, Bill Lakin CR took upon himself the anglicization of the document. So that's really the ancient history, and the more modern history, I think, is going to be handled by some other folks.
All right. Well, let me get Mark, if you could talk a little bit about how the Fire Standard 1 and the Fire Standard 2 kind of morphed into the S700.
Well, I think going back a little bit even before that, and I think Rusty probably deserves some credit here. There was a period of time that the IICRC wasn't pursuing a fire standard. And it's my understanding, and Rusty, you feel free to jump in here and set the record straight, but there were a lot of folks certainly in RIA, within RIA and within the industry that felt that having a fire standard was really important. And so Rusty, you want to jump in? Because I know you were, I think, the RIA president when the pins were filed with RIA back in 2009 or 2008, something like that.
Yeah, Pete is certainly the historian that would remember dates and things like that a whole bunch better. But obviously, I viewed RIA as the experts in restoration and felt that it was very important that the standard be written, frankly, back then by the RIA, because I felt that the real pool of knowledge was within our organization. Obviously, as time went on and things shifted, it went where it went, which is perfectly fine. But that was where it very first started, and obviously many years later, it is where it is. It took a life of its own.
I don't think any of us would have thought it'd go so long. But RA's work, I mean, the RA volunteers, Lee King, John Pletcher. John, who else was? I know that you and Lee were heavily involved. I believe Larry Holder was heavily involved as well. John, who else from?
Yeah, you're skipping over FS1, Mark. Yeah, FS1 was mostly Marty King and Brad Kovar heading up that group of consensus body members. I don't know every consensus body member, but once Fire Standard 1 was completed, work was started on Fire Standard 2. That's how I got involved. Marty asked me if I wanted to join the consensus body, and then certain things happened. Larry Holder was the original vice chair. Lee King was the chair, and then when Belfour left RIA, I got promoted to the second vice chair. That's how that happened. So, but yeah, it goes way back to 2012 for FS1 and then 2014 for FS2. So it's been a long time coming. We got it finished. We got one finished and two finished.
Yeah, so RA had a tremendous amount of many of the years I was on the board there at RIA. We were always monitoring the progress of FS1 and FS2, and then I think it was 2017, it may have been 2016, we got the news that IICRC had filed for pins. There's I think probably a lot more stuff that could be discussed here, but the bottom line is that IICRC was pursuing a fire standard as well, and I had really two concerns at that point. Number one concern I had was there being two fire standards in the industry. I just was really concerned about the implications of, situations where there's litigation or there's a dispute amongst experts where you have two different standards that are being called into question. What is the standard? And I saw it really as, first of all, problematic just for the divisive wedge that it would put in the industry. And then the second concern was, as RIA navigated this and tried to determine what they were going to do, it was never RIA's intent to compete in this respect with IICRC. What was going to happen with the stewardship of all those volunteer hours that were spent on FS1 and FS2? That was a big concern of mine and the RIA's board. And so we began discussions with IICRC that were really, I would say they went about 18 months. It was a long process. There was a period of time where IICRC and RIA were somewhat, there's a bunch of history there, but they were somewhat hostile toward each other. And I thought that was a shame too, really seeing these two entities that both of us had our constituencies within aligned and working together was something that was really important to RIA's board. And so over the course of a year or year and a half, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out and shape an agreement that ultimately was the RIA and IICRC agreement that was signed in 2019. RIA sold its intellectual property from FS1 and FS2 to IICRC at that time. And in addition to that, there was sort of a whole suite of other agreements that we came to that, really provided a time of peace in the industry and time where we could work together on things. And out of that came some other task forces that built some guideline documents were really, I think, effective in COVID. The COVID guidelines collaboratively published there. Really good work done by the volunteers there, and then also in the polar storms that happened. So it was I think positive, and that really was my and RIA's role there. Our board was very engaged with it. All the board felt it was very important, and it looked like it was going to get sidetracked quite a number of times and maybe not happen, but glad it ultimately did, and that we had guys like John and Bran take the mantle and run with it and get us to where we are today, where we finally have a fire damage standard. So pretty exciting stuff.
Rusty, go ahead with the next one if you would.
Sure. Hey, John and Bran, you guys want to maybe just go over the key sections of the standard for us and talk a little bit about what you've got.
John, go ahead.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'd like to start with the forward. This document, the 700 is largely based on the format of the foundations that were put in FS2. We use a lot of the chapters and the nomenclature from that document to make the 700. So in the forward, we have a couple things that are important. We want the reader to understand that there's other things that are not part of the standard that are included in this document should they purchase it that are very, very important that they read. One is the appendices. In the appendices, we have a document called the Restoration Theory, and it really is very instructional and very informative. The standard itself is not instructional or informative. It's supposed to be the standard of care, what reasonably prudent restorers are doing right now, every day in their businesses. So it's really what are we doing? But this document has other information in it, and the foreword is very important to read. Cliff's going to go into a little more detail about the foundational principles on how the consensus body arrived at the wording and the descriptions of the different sections of the standard. So we're asking people, and we actually got IICRC to put it in bold in the foreword. If they read the foreword, they'll see it. To please read that appendix first, and to also read and understand the 9 foundational principles by which we based our writings on.
Yeah, and the one thing I would add to that, that's all completely accurate what you said. The one thing I would add to that is that we really tried to keep the scope, purpose, and application as focused as we could, and we would during consensus calls, we were coming back to that all the time, just to say, you know what, we're getting off the range here, folks, and we need to go back to this is what we're talking about. That's all great information, and maybe that belongs somewhere else, but it doesn't belong in this document. So we were very mindful about what we were trying to get done and stay, you know, on the road to where we needed to be.
I think we've got a slide that shows those 9 foundational
Well, I
principles.
don't know that we're,
Cliff?
John or Joe, I think we have to go through the rest of the sections first.
Is that on the next slide?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Rick Grayson.
Okay.
So
So-
real quick, go ahead. I'll start with we'll just alternate here, John, real
Okay,
quick. So
sure.
section 1 is FSD restoration and contractor qualifications. So what we tried to do, or not what we tried to do, what we did here was
It's hard to change gears from tried to done.
Yeah, we did, exactly right. What we did is we really tried to spell out what makes a restorer especially qualified to do this kind of work, right? We all know that general contractors and painters and, you know, all the other guys that have a pickup truck and a toolbox think they can do this work, and it's just not the case. It is, you know, it's specialized work, and it takes years of experience and training and just being around it to pick it up and learn it. Also in section 1, we have a really great description of the levels of fire severity. And, you know, we discussed using a number system for that, which I know some of the other standards have done. But what we did is we eventually came back around to, well, look, what does everybody talk about now when they're talking about levels of fire severity? And that was, you know, low, moderate, you know, severe, and those, you know, those kind of words, not numbers. And we have some really good discussion about what that looks like, what that smells like, you know, what the experience is when you're in, you know, a low severity fire. And so, and how you would call it that, you know, and then the whole project kind of starts from there. You have to establish those things up front, and then it gets you off on the right foot.
Yeah, I want to add to that real quick, and then we'll move on to the next one. Is that there's a whole section in 1.10 of section 1 where we discuss restoration what a restoration contractor is and what a non-restoration contractor is, and the differences what Bran was talking about. And to come out of that and say that the point of this whole thing was that we're saying here in our words that unless you have become proficient doing this work and you can yourself and you can do this work yourself successfully, and have your results-based driven client acceptance of this work, you are qualified to do it. If you don't have those things, you are not qualified to write a restoration protocol. We call it the restoration work plan. And that's one of the objectives of writing the standard. Cliff, do we want to talk about the objectives real quick before we go into each section?
Either way, I mean, if you want, what do you mean by the objectives?
Well,
You mean
we
the
wanted the document to do 3 things essentially. We wanted to improve or enhance the image of the professional restorer in the eyes of the insurance community and the general public, to say, you know, what makes us different, you know, what makes us a legitimate industry. And the second thing was we didn't want to get involved with a lot of testing and sampling and things like that. We wanted to keep this to be you know, based on our observations and field tests and things like that. We didn't feel the need for testing was relevant on most internal household or even small business fires. Now there's exceptions, of course, you know, to, you know, lab fires or schools or hospitals or stuff where that kind of stuff is critical and has to be done. But as a basic rule, we try to stay away from that. And the third thing was we had some issues with third-party management companies telling restorers what they can and cannot charge for. So there's language in this document that sort of is hopefully going to help level that playing field a little bit. You know, if the restorers go to the insurer and say, and maybe Mark can use, hopefully will use this when his in his advocacy program and say, hey, but it says in the standard this, you know, so that's the 3 goals. So section 1, you can see how we're saying if you are qualified to do this work, it means you've done it before. And, you know, I don't think the insurance community can say that they're the people they send out to homes to scope these losses have done the work and done it successfully.
But let me give a follow-up real quick, because I watched yesterday you did the presentation, and there was a lot of discussion about, being a professional restoration contractor and that others aren't qualified to do this. But, I'm looking at California right now. There are going to be thousands and thousands of homes that need cleaned. They're not all going to be cleaned by professional restoration contractors. They're going to be cleaned by homeowners. They're going to be cleaned by any number of different groups. Could they also use this document, learn from this document? Is it strictly for the restoration contractors, or can others use it as well?
Well, now that you brought it up, Joe, wildfires, Cliff, you want to talk about this for a second?
Well, I think we can, Joe, but what I would suggest is that, for people in California, FEMA put out a document based on experience that they had in the state of Colorado, which provides excellent guidance. And it was actually made for people that have experienced it. So yes, I think it provides the necessary guidance, and there probably wouldn't be a need for a homeowner to actually, invest in purchasing this and so on and so forth. I think they might be confused by it, but I think there's FEMA. There's also, and I'm trying to remember, I'll put in the blog an actual link to that document, but it was done very, very well.
But to answer your question, Joe, yes, the assessment of fire residue presence or absence and the methodologies to remove it are in this document. And if they wanted to use those the way we've described that would certainly help them.
Yeah, I just can't see. I mean, a lot of this is not going to be covered by insurance. They're not going to be able to bring in restoration. They're not. They're going to bring in, a guy with a pickup truck to help them clean the place up the best they possibly can. I think this would give them some great guidance, and I think Cliff has a good point with the FEMA document. And I know the University of Colorado has put out some stuff for homeowners as well. So we'll get all that in the blog. Let's go ahead and move forward, Cliff.
So we're up to section 2, John.
Yeah.
I'll just take section 2. That's just real straightforward. What business people running businesses like ours need to have in terms of insurance and professional ethics and things like that. It's contractually, we did a little bit of work with Ed Cross, the restoration lawyer, about what kind of contracts people would want to sign, or authorization forms, or those kind of things to get going. And then we emphasized the importance of documentation, and mostly photographic documentation, but we also have a way to document odor, which is interesting, and I think people enjoy reading about that. So it's really just it's a cover your assets kind of thing, and also protect yourselves with proper documentation. That's what that's about.
Yeah, and we also introduced an acronym, MIPs, which are materially interested parties, and RWP, Restoration Work Plan, which we thought the genesis of it was scope of work, but for a number of reasons we ended up with Restoration Work Plan as a new acronym for the standard.
Okay. How about section 4? Who wants to go over that?
Section 3. Don't skip that one. That's the most
I missed 3.
one.
I'm sorry. That's a big one.
Yeah. So the first thing, I'm going to go back to something that John said earlier. The first thing when it comes to section 3 is to read Appendix A. And what it really goes into, what burned, what are your residue types and descriptions of those types, finding the boundaries of the fire. It talks about pre-existing conditions and what those might be, and test cleaning procedures and when and how, and then follow your nose and find the odor source. Because what it comes down to is source removal, which we're going to get into in a minute. But that was one of the driving things we had. This is all about source removal, and if you don't get all of the source, you're not going to get all of the odor.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that too, that as professionals, we have to look where we don't see things that we don't see. Like you go into a room and you don't see any smoke, but then you take a section of drywall off the wall because the fire was in the basement, and lo and behold, the insulation is black. You walk in a room, and if you don't have that knowledge and skill set, you're likely to miss a lot of potential odor sources. I mean, you have to understand how smoke moves through a building, and that's what you're going to find in Appendix A, the behavior of smoke, and that's very important when we're looking. We have odors we cannot locate, and you have to do some investigative demolition. And that again, we think that the professional restorers are much more qualified to do that than people that are not.
Yeah,
I
section,
think that, one of the terms that we use among ourselves pretty commonly, and people maybe outside the industry might not be familiar with, is peeling an onion. And you need to look at the building almost like an onion in certain situations. You have to start peeling in certain areas, and oftentimes the more you peel, the more you find, and so on and so forth. But establishing the boundaries of the damage is really most important.
And that's also where you get a lot of contention. This did it go this far? Do we really have to do this much, and so on and so forth. I'm wondering, do you cover in that section the difference between smoke coming from outside and smoke coming from inside, or do you feel there is no difference?
We don't, to answer your question directly, no, we don't talk about it, but smoke entering a building, yes, there is some discussion on how smoke does enter through penetrations in windows and doors and attics and things like that, but we don't spend a lot of time on that.
Okay. Want to go through the next section?
Well, one further thing I'd like to add, Joe, I think one of the tendencies that's pretty common with wildfires is they kind of fall in a couple of different categories. You have these total loss situations, that are near the source, but in many situations, these claims are submitted by people that are, living some distance away, where the residues have been carried by air currents and so on and so forth. And, one of the things that we see commonly in doing structural fire restoration is really an abundance of evidence. It's you kind of walk in and there's literally no doubt in your mind. You can see it, you can smell it, you can touch it and feel it, and so on and so forth. And I think one of the common things with these wildfires is a lot of times the evidence is underwhelming. Actually, it's kind of hard to tell what was there, what wasn't there, and those are some situations where you may want to do some sampling, just to determine the presence or absence of residue, and there are a number of different ways to do it. You can get labs involved if you want to, or you can kind of do it on site yourself and just kind of add everything up. But there's a process for doing it, and yes, those processes are definitely included within the standard, pretty much step by step how to do it.
Yeah, you talk about the burn zone. I think looked at Los Angeles right now, the Palisades
Right.
that's a burn zone. We're not talking about that. We're talking about up in Santa Barbara or San Francisco. If the wind blows coastally up north, there's going to be claims, and people are going to say, I think I smell smoke in my house. So you're right. That's where it becomes a little trickier. So we don't really go into a lot about that. But when you can see it and smell it, and to get it on your skin when you touch stuff, you got a problem. So. Anyway, section 4 is very short. It's just we specifically wanted to point out some examples of equipment, tools, and materials, because some of the work that we do is done on a time and materials basis. And we want to have restorers have a clear understanding of what they could potentially charge for under a materials charge, and what would be considered a normal hand tool or something like that wouldn't be charged for. That's basically the sum of that. It's very short.
Okay. How about the restoration mitigation section? Who wants to talk about that?
I'll start. Yeah, so it really talks about priorities and what you need to do, first and second and third to mitigate the damage on that site. And they're all different, and you'd really just have to have experience and knowledge to treat, whether it's if there's plastic that burned and now you got to be concerned about the corrosion on the metals, or if there's a lot of moisture and you got to think about that, or if the roof is open and you got to think about that. It's all about setting priorities to get the restoration turned around and started off on the right foot, because we've all seen restoration projects that they didn't consider all of those factors up front, and then a fire job now turns into a mold job, and that's just not where it needed to go.
Yeah, the title of this program, Indoor Air Quality, is what we've really focused on in emergency services and mitigation, is getting the air quality better, whether it's ventilation or using air scrubbers or introducing some kind of odor management techniques, that kind of thing. So it's really important. It's not really a safety section, but it's getting where the worker can feel more comfortable in that environment, and getting
to ensure a successful project. Yeah.
I'd like to try and get this slide over before halftime. We're coming up. How about source removal? What are the key points there, and why is that a section of its own?
Source removal is a word that we use instead of cleaning because it's more than cleaning. Because you do. Marty used to say that restoration starts with demolition and it ends at reconstruction. So what you do between that and when the house starts getting put together is what we do. And sometimes that's demolition, sometimes it's hand washing, sometimes it's scraping, sometimes it's media blasting, soda blasting, or whatever. So it's more involved. So we talk about all that different methodologies in there. So that's the meat and potatoes of the standard, sections 5, 6, and 8, source removal and deodorization.
Yeah, we talk about the starting with the gentle processes and working to aggressive options to get the results desired. And also talks about that a lot of times, maybe sometimes, most of the time, even John might say, that cleaning things takes multiple processes. You may have to dry clean something and then wet clean something, or vice versa. And oftentimes you get pushback on, what do you mean you had to clean it twice? Well, that's what it took.
Yeah, and this is going to be so helpful for people out there doing this type of work in the future, because now you've got something to point to that's actual standard of care in the industry. Let's go back to that last slide, because I want to make sure someone gets a chance to cover that next section. Can you go back one, Grayson?
Yeah, go back. Yeah.
Oh,
Bran, you want to take HVAC?
Yeah,
yeah.
so
Let's
no,
talk
that's
about
all
the
right.
HVAC
Yeah,
section.
so we had a section in there for HVAC. And I don't, most folks have maybe heard his name, but we engaged Tom Jacobellis to help us because he's the guy, right? He's the HVAC guy, restoration guy, and I have a relationship with him. He's in the Belfour family, so we asked him to come and help us with that section, and we got through that section. It's got a flow chart. I mean, this is what he's been doing for decades. So it was just all a matter of him educating the CB and getting it on paper, what he's been doing for decades. And then it spun off, and that was the genesis of the S590 standalone standard, for all perils, which he finished in record time. But it all started with Section 7. Section 7 is still in the S700, but next go round, next revision, that section will probably be dropped because it's covered, equally as well in the 590.
I was going to ask about that. That's great. How about fire and smoke odor management here?
But you know who had a big influence on this section?
I wonder.
Man. I think, but really to come out of this section, we talk about all the different types of odor management techniques. We don't use the word deodorization. We use odor management because that's really what it is. There's sometimes in fire you cannot get the odor out. You either can't access it, or it's so deeply embedded we have to go on to the next phases like sealers and stuff like that. But we stress in here that you've got to try. Source removal is probably a key component of odor removal, and Cliff will back me up on that. You got to get it as clean as you can get it before you go to that last straw of putting down an odor blocking or odor barrier over the surface like a sealer. If you don't, you can trap that odor in. So we talk about that a lot. It's a really, really good section. I think that people are going to learn a lot about deodorization and odor management through this section. It's the no close-in. The inspection is really important. Marty wrote a whole article on the most important inspection, and that's the final odor inspection before any close-in is done. So that's what that's about.
If I could add something, thanks to Mark Springer. What happened is I was one of the authors. I wrote the odor removal section for the fire loss specialist course, and I asked Mark whether or not we could include cite that, be able to include information from it and so on and so forth. And he was able to get permission from the board, not just to use that section, but to use some other sections from that course. I think we had information from Dad Kovar's course and several others. So it was just good. And nice thing about it is that information is in complete sync. So it's good. You don't have two different opinions, two different sets of information. It's in perfect synchronization. Back to you guys.
Okay, let's go to, where are we now? Contents restoration?
Contents, yeah. So we started section 9, and I think we pretty much had it fully wrapped up. And then, the S320 contents restoration standard got off the ground. So again, the S320 is kind of, this was the genesis of the S320. John and I are both on that CB. And I had, next go round when the revision comes out for the 700, I suspect that there will be no more Section 9 because the S320 will be out and on its own.
Bran, is that 320 specific to fire and smoke, or is
No, it is all perils.
all perils? Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay. All right. How about post-restoration evaluation? A little different terminology than I'm used to, I think.
Yeah, we had some blowback from some of the hygienist community about verification versus evaluation. So, we Cliff's going to talk about that with our foundational principles. But we talk about how to evaluate the success or failure of your project throughout the document. We just summed it up in this section, so it really doesn't need a whole lot of care. But we talk about some techniques that a lot of restorers are using, but maybe not all of them, that they need to know about it. This is what Marty did for a living. He used containment. He used to chase odors and fires after restores were done and say, "Hey, Marty, we don't know why it still smells. Can you come out and look at it?" That's what he did. So we talk about containment, and there's also this other way of testing, getting odor transfer onto media called patch testing that we talk about in there. So it's thanks to Cliff. So it's short, but it's just really a summary of what we talk about in all the other sections.
Cliff, do you want to add anything?
I think maybe under Roundup, Joe.
All right. Limitations, complexities, complications. That's in every
It's boilerplate.
It is.
Every
That's
IICR.
boilerplate stuff.
All right.
Yeah, just insert
anything you
fire and
guys want to
smoke.
mention from the appendices or the glossary, or should we go to halftime here?
I think we've talked about the most important document to us is in the appendices, but you're going to find other information in there that is instructional and educational. So I think it's worth reading. We really feel that the forward and the appendices are equally as important to the reader as the meat of the standard itself.
Great job going through
that.
And
I would also say that we realized, and the CB fully realizes that it already needs to be revised, right? As we were winding down and we were revisiting sections, we would kind of start to go down a path, and we would have to, Millie would step in and say, whoa, we got to go forward, right? We need to get this finished and get this published. John and I and Cliff and the whole CB realizes there's already room for improvement in this document.
Before we go to halftime, if you guys could prepare as soon as we come back for the second half, I would appreciate if you could mention all of those that were on your CB. You mentioned industrial hygiene, people were involved. I noticed Ed Light was on the call here.
I can do that,
I think
for sure.
they all deserve a lot of credit, and all the volunteers doing all the different standards for IICRC deserve credit. All right, let's go to halftime, Grayson. Our association sponsors are AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World, AIHA.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Actionable insights, no more mistakes, no more missed line items in your Xactimate estimates at getinsights.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, improving human, animal, and environmental health with electrostatic spray technology and advanced chemistries at byoplanet.com. Tramex meters, innovation in moisture detection and humidity monitoring systems since 1974 at tramexmeters.com. I forgot we added Tramex there at the end, but they're great. Welcome back, Tramex. Great to have you back. Who wants to thank the consensus board members real quick here, or just mention who they were?
Yep. I can go through it real quick. We already mentioned Tom Iacobellis. He was not a consensus board member, but he certainly he carried the weight of the that one chapter and the S590. So we had Rodney Harris, Brad Kovar, Ed Light, Dave Mason, Scott McFadden, Dave Robbins, Chris Wisnowski, Josh Smith, Greg Weatherman, Mehmet Ukar, Lawrence Wymet, and Cliff, of course.
Sounds like an all-star panel. Rusty, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, hey, I can't help but to say it, Bran, but if you and Jacobellis think that us at Belfour are going to give you guys another 10 years for the revision. Jeez, every time I called you guys, I'm working on the standard. I'm not available. That card's gotten played out.
It's only 5 years, Rusty.
John, how about we noticed that IEP is not one of the acronyms used here. You guys maybe want to talk about that, because I'm sure that will be observed from some folks.
Yes, we didn't want to really talk about specifically an individual, singular individual that could do testing. We talked about the fact that restorers can do some testing if they know how to use a lab. Lab sends instructions on how to do lift samples and even canister vac samples, and send them to them, and they'll interpret that data. What we refer to this person, though, if we have a problem, if we have a dispute, or we have a question of whether the residues are related to the event, the target event that happened in this house, we call them a specialized expert, and that can be a number of people. It can be the guy that knows how to repair and restore antique tall case clocks, or oil paintings, antique oil paintings, or someone who specializes in doing this testing. So it's a different term that we used. We wanted to kind of break away from the industry conception that we had to have this person with these credentials to do it. That's kind of where we came away with that. We didn't want to promote that for fire.
What was the name of that person again? Specialized expert?
Specialized expert, and the definition we have is a person or firm that performs functions beyond the knowledge base and core skill set of the restorer or restoration company. So it's all about knowing your limitations.
So I'm going to toss this up to the group. What is the role of sampling and analysis on fire restoration? I mean, it seems to me it's rare in the real world, but I could be wrong.
Well, I think we're going to get into it specifically, Joe. But I think while we're back on this IEP thing, to us, there are a lot of specialized experts, and IEP was just too narrow of a definition. A lot of, for instance, a fine art conservator doesn't fit under that category of IEP. So rather than listing each different possibility, whether it could be a structural engineer or whatever, someone to fix the elevator, we just utilized the term specialized expert. And I think we felt compelled not to subordinate fire damage restorers to IEPs or industrial hygienists, especially those who lack firsthand remediation experience. And, how can someone who has never done it, doesn't know how to do it, write a protocol to tell someone who has to do it how to do it? It just really didn't make sense. And I think that we just wanted to really, take a strong position on that. That's happened with other standards. And we just didn't really want to go there. So it was a decision that was made very, very early on. And actually the word IEP doesn't appear in the document at all.
Well, Cliff, I think that was extremely wise decision, for lots of reasons. And as you guys are talking, I think back to why did we first originally decide this was so important that we did it, and it was for a couple of reasons. But one, we wanted to bring common sense to this, because it's so easy to blow this way out of proportion. And we also wanted to box out the non-professional restoration people who thought or claimed they were a restoration contractor, right? But by having these standards, we box them out, because those folks are really the ones who do the most damage to our industry by submitting horrendous scopes, horrendous pricing, performing horrible services. And then, we as an industry all get lumped in together as a bunch of bad folks or bad contractors. And that's not who we as the professionals are. And having said that, I think it was really important that we were the ones, to your point, that set the standards and not somebody else. And that we did not have to qualify up to someone else because frankly, nobody knew it better than us. And I coincidentally, and maybe it is or is not a good analogy, I don't know, but yesterday I brought my car in for service and the dealer called up. I obviously brought the car to a qualified dealer. They said, you need new brakes. I said, okay, put brakes on it. And I'm thinking, did the mechanic who was putting on the brakes call up a consultant and say, write me a protocol on how to put on the brakes? I sure hope not. I qualified I qualified the shop, I qualified the mechanic, and if he didn't have to call a consultant to write a protocol for it, how much more would I have written paid for the brakes? And if anybody should know how to do it, should be the mechanic there, right? So again, I think this was something that was very, very important to all of us, that we wrote the standard in the eyes of us, the restoration people who touch and feel and experience this stuff every single day, and not add unnecessary steps, unnecessary costs, and unnecessary actions just because someone thought it needed to be done. So,
I think a couple other things to add too is, Rusty, you spend now most of your time in Florida, I think, when you're not out on emergencies or trying to put out fires elsewhere. But you look at the state of Florida and look what's happened down there. You have assessors and you have remediators, and these assessors who I guess would be referred to as IEPs. I mean, they take a one-day course, like a one-day wonder. They buy an air sampler and they're out pumping samples and so on and so forth, and writing protocols and so on and so forth. And I think Florida's a mess when it comes to mold. And there's actually, they're written into the legislation. There's a separation between remediators and assessors and so on and so forth. And based upon what happened with mold remediation, I think we were all horrified by it, couldn't do anything about it, and kind of decided that, hey, we really need to try to protect the industry from this occurring. And, that's kind of what we did. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the word specialized expert occurs something like about 18 times within the document. And I think we had 2 or 3 slides where, I cut and pasted each one. But Grayson, if you could go back to foundational principles, I think we really need to go back to that just for a minute, so that, and there's actually 9 of these foundational principles. And this is something that we want to read it to you, and I think we'll alternate,
we spent a lot of time on this.
Yeah, a lot of time on this. And, there are actually 9 of them. And I think you need to hear it, because I think this answers, we believe, a lot of questions. And I'll do the first one. So, chemicals from a combination of indoor and outdoor sources are ubiquitous and present in background soils and dust found on the interior of buildings. There are no standards to distinguish concentrations measured in fire-damaged homes from normal background levels. Without pre-loss baseline testing of a property to establish which contaminants were present prior to the fire, it is not possible to determine the specific contaminants created and deposited directly as the result of that fire. So, just in a normal house alone, I think there's something like 32 or 33 different combustion sources. So just that's something to think about. So go to the next one, Grayson, and John, why don't you take it?
Restorers use targeted samplings. Example, wipes, cellular sponges, or cosmetic sponges, combined with an olfactory inspection to rule in or rule out presumptive presence or absence of fire-related residue and odor, and to establish the boundaries of the fire-related damage in a building.
Okay,
And this
let's
is
go
common
to,
sense stuff. This is what this is. This is what we know. This is what we do. This is what we've always done for 50 plus years.
next one,
Next one,
Grayson.
Grayson. Bran?
Sure. Restorers use pilot test cleaning of fire residues on surfaces to determine the most effective cleaning products and processes that yield the most successful results.
Yeah,
So
so
again,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say this, it speaks to that it is processes. It's not always a single process.
And it's like it's site specific as well. So, someone who doesn't know what tools are available cannot possibly write a protocol to tell us how to do it. It just doesn't add up.
As Marty
Next
used
one.
to say, it's also a knowledge of the material underneath the residue that you need to be aware of before you put chemicals on or processes on anything, on any surface.
Go to number 4, Grayson.
Project-specific combination of restorative cleaning products and processes is designated to effectively remove fire-related residues and odors in addition to pre-existing residues and dust. These products and processes generally leave conditions better than pre-loss, as restorative cleaning physically removes soils and fire-related residues, volatile organic compounds, and other fire-related contaminants residing in smoke residues are also removed.
I found that one interesting because I don't think a lot of people think about the fact that you guys oftentimes leave, most always, places cleaner than they were before you got there, before the fire. So I think that's a great foundational principle. Let's go to number 5.
Well, Joe, before we move on, I think it's, in all honesty, I didn't realize it until we had some other guests, like Miss Farmer from out in Colorado, who's
Delphine
written
Farmer.
about it. Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. Delphine Farmer. And they did testing and actually proved this, where they actually smoked up a property and tested before, during, and after. And, it's in the literature. I don't think we gave ourselves credit for what we were actually doing. So next slide.
Well said.
Me?
John?
Yeah, while there is a known association between firefighting and occupational disease in firefighters, there is no known association between fire and smoke damage restoration work and occupational disease in restorers working in cold fire scenes. As documented in this standard, restorers are required by the authorities having jurisdiction to provide employees with appropriate training, personal protective equipment, and engineering controls to reduce risks from hazardous substances which may release during and after a fire. Restoration's firm have a long history of managing occupational exposures and have earned commensurate rates with workers' compensation insurers. Says it
Next one.
all.
Next one.
Indoor air typically contains chemicals from occupant activities, consumer products, building materials, and outdoor, quote, ambient air. Indoor air samples collected for site-specific assessment after a fire will detect chemicals from these sources, as well as temporary off-gassing from products used during restoration and reconstruction activities. For example, new building products, paints, etc. Therefore, chemical or VOC air sampling following a fire or fire-related contaminants cannot be relied on to draw conclusions with respect to restoration, ongoing exposure, and health risk.
Well, I'll bet you get a little pushback from some of the industrial hygiene world on that one, but let's go to the next one.
Development of disease is multifaceted, and the relationship between environmental contamination, exposure, and disease is complex. The presence of a contaminant in the environment alone does not mean disease will occur. Therefore, basing project clearance on contaminant measured concentrations is inconclusive and should be considered arbitrary. Joe, we might get some pushback, but a lot of this was Ed Light. I mean, he was the person that was very adamant about.
And I think
this.
You make a good point here. There are no TLVs or PELs or anything else for these types of projects, and that puts a restorer in a tough position. And I think you guys are smart to grab it by the horns and take control of it rather than follow the leader. Next one.
The criteria for post-restoration evaluation of a project is that surfaces and materials are free and clear of visible fire residues and no fire-related odors are detectable. Quality controls achieved through periodic, unaided visual and olfactory inspection of the work performed on the building and contents, and supplemented by client participation at critical phases and at the end of the project. Satisfactory completion of a project is based on confirmation that the scope of work has been completed and client acceptance.
That one is vital.
Yeah,
And I
that's
love that you
huge.
put client participation and client acceptance in there. That's ultimately what you need is buy-in from those people.
That's the only way you're going to get paid.
Yes, sir. Let's go to the next one.
It's the most important thing. I mean, you can have lab sampling that says that, and I've seen it. You can have sampling that says, there's, 1 part per billion of dioxin or whatever in the building, and all of a sudden, they have to tear the house down and so on and so forth. And the people are not adversely affected by it, and there are different types of dioxin. And the question is, if they're, where did that dioxin come from? Was it from the fire, or was it from cooking out on their grill, or from soil, outdoor contamination, so on and so forth? I think you have to be realistic and you have to be practical about this stuff. I guess the last one.
Well-trained and experienced restorers with a history of past performance obtaining satisfactory results are qualified to develop and manage a restoration work plan, known as protocol. In contrast, third-party individuals are not as effective in this role unless they are specifically trained and experienced in fire damage assessment and restoration methodologies. So we've kind of mentioned this, a couple different ways and a couple different times during the call here. It's just, it's all about being qualified to do this work. And so many folks that we've all run into throughout our careers are just underqualified. Fair
enough, gentlemen. Cliff, should we go to the roundup, or do you want
to? Hang on a second. Let's see what we got left here.
Let me ask, Rusty, you want to ask this next question real quick, or?
Yeah, sure. I guess, why does, other than wildfires, those 3 words seem to show up, guys?
Okay, I think we have a slide on it actually, but
so
you want to take
why
this?
does
You want me to?
3 words other than wildfires within the scope of S700? That's
yeah.
Okay.
I think it's the last slide in the deck.
Last one. Grayson, you're going to have your work cut out for you after this show.
Anyway, go ahead, John. You want to take a swing at it, or?
Well, at the time that we were writing this, we had to go back, like Bran said earlier, we had to go back to scope and purpose many times. The IICRC decided that wildfire should have its own standard, so we excluded wildfires from the standard in this language, and you see it there. I think in the revision that comes out, what we realize is that the assessment of the situation, whether it's from wildfire or an internal fire, is fairly similar. And in fact, the cleaning and removal of those residues is definitely much easier. And maids can do it. It's mostly just horizontal surfaces. Not always, but most times when you're 30, 40 miles away. But so we decided that when this revision comes out in 5 years, we'll probably reword or remove that language.
Yeah, so it's in there as a direct result of the development of the concurrent development of the 760, which has since been taken off the shelf.
Well, and I
think if I could add to it, the word wildfire appears twice in the document, and you can see that. If you drop down to the bottom one, which is highlighted, this is what we had initially. We had a list of things that were comprehensively not addressed. And so what we had initially was issues occurring from certain situations, such as wildfire, chemical fires, or industrial fires that pose environmental hazards. So any type of fire that's going to pose some significant environmental hazard, it's unusual or whatever, we're not covering in the standard, but we are covering everything else. if you look at that sentence, there used to be a period after the word internal fire, because we had external fires, and that's what we felt that wildfires were, an external fire. Then we had we had structural fires, which were interior. So there used to be a period there, and then and this standard actually pre-existed. The work began on this before the decision was made to do the 760. So this was already done and put away. And then after the decision to make the 760, this period became a comma, and those three words other than wildfires were added. So that would be I think one of the first changes would be just to remove those three words. And I think the subject of wildfire is then covered adequately and properly within the document.
Is there any chance that down the road you'll add more on wildfires? I mean, there was a lot of work done by this other committee, and maybe some of it, I'm sure a lot of it's very good. Is there any chance you'll add that?
I think what happened is, certainly I think you could add some more information. And I think that information would probably find its way into the appendix.
I think the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
There's definitely some information that the 760 did that has value in the revised 700.
Very good, gentlemen. Cliff, roundup.
Roundup.
Let's go to the roundup, Grayson. All right, the roundup's brought to us by TramXmeters.com. Go to TramX Meters. Great to have them back on board here. Rusty, let me start with you on the roundup. Any other questions or comments you'd like to make?
No, I would just like to say thank you. Obviously Cliff, Bran, John, and Mark Springer, continuing on with so many people who did a lot of work. And I think for all the listeners who have never been involved with putting a standard together, this is something people do out of passion. They don't do it for recognition, and they do it for the best interest of our industry. I just want to thank all of you. You're all a class act, and you've obviously put many years, and I can't even imagine how many hours into this. And it's not an easy task. And so for selfish reasons of me as a restoration person, I'd like to just thank all of you for everything that you've done. And no listener should underestimate just how difficult and time consuming this was. Absolutely. Mark, let me go to you, get some final thoughts.
Yeah, I just echo what Rusty's sentiments. It's such an enormous job. And I think of what, guys like John and Lee King and Bran and a lot of these people invested in this. And I just think the industry owes them a tremendous debt of gratitude. So thank you to them. And then also, these things, the volunteers are critical, but staff is also pivotal. And I think the work that Millie Washington and Brandon Burton do behind the scenes at IICRC is critical. Millie is such a pro in what she does. Brandon's a wealth of knowledge. That's a hard job. That's a difficult job to manage all those CB meetings over years and years of time. And so I think we need to recognize them. And then again, thank you to the consensus body. I really appreciate that you guys went through the names of those who did all that work. So thank you I think there's a couple maybe consensus body members that jumped on. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. The industry needed the standard. Thank you very much.
John, final thoughts or comments?
Yeah, no, I'm going to say again, I'll agree with Mark. We really couldn't have done this without the great CV that we had, and everybody contributed. We couldn't do any business unless we had a quorum, and it was hard to get a quorum every Thursday afternoon for an hour and a half for the 3 or 4 years that we were having these meetings before we finished the document. But I have to say that the fun of it was writing it and creating it and talking about it amongst our all the CB members and getting it down on paper. The least fun was having to deal with public review comments, which we got over 600 in the beginning, and it made it really a chore, and it got to be hostile at some point, with certain people. But I'm going to say this is now I know why there was never a fire standard, and I'm glad we could get it done. It was a tremendous amount of work, but and this is, by the way, I just want to mention, this is I finally got my hard copy. This is the first ANSI standard that I'm aware of that has photographs in it, but I'm disappointed on the other hand because they're black and white and loses a little bit of the poof,
Translation, huh?
Yeah.
All right, John, thank you. And Bran?
No, I have nothing to add. I mean, between Rusty and Mark and John, I couldn't add anything else.
All right.
I agree with everything they said.
Well, thank you, and thanks for your hard work. Cliff, before I go to you, do you want to bring Pete in, or do you want to go first?
I want to go first. I told you, you wanted to talk about the odor section and so on and so forth. I think that's going to really benefit the industry because this odor transfer testing is very, very simple to do. It's common sense. It's very practical. It enables us to hunt down odors in certain situations. It enables us to determine, whether something smells or it doesn't. And very, very simple process and not expensive or anything like that. It's really, really common sense. So I'm kind of proud that was included in the document. And yeah.
All right, we're running a little over, but I would be remiss if we didn't get the thoughts of the restoration industry's global watchdog, Pete Consigli. Pete, do we still have you?
Yeah, of course you still have me. Anyway, first thing, Mark, thanks Mark for recognizing Millie and Brandon and people like that, because there's so many people behind the scenes do so much that often don't get the recognition that they deserve. Developing a standard is something that one of the past presidents of ASTM said the best standard writing group is a table of balanced biases, and that's why getting multiple perspectives is such an important part of the ANSI process. Stephen Spivak, who's along with Marty for years, were technical directors for our association for RIA. He wrote a book on standards, and I remember one of the quotes that he had in there was, the volunteers who serve in these committees, he put in air quotes, they do the grunt work, and they're often underappreciated. So the fact that so many people have recognized all of those guys, I think people was very important. First of all, the second thing, nice job with the show, gentlemen, and the leadership for everybody with the 700. I will tell you, historically now, I have a few comments, and I'm going to do the quick wrap, Joe. There's one person significantly involved in the leadership role that was inadvertently neglected, and he's a friend of mine. Cliff, Joe's in the show, and that's Mr. Mike McGinnis. Mike McGinnis was actually the first person to raise his hand to be a chairman of FS1. He was actually the first chair, and you guys may not have been aware of that. And I think he participated maybe in the 700 somewhere, but I'm not sure. So, they call our industry as the restoration industry, but it started with fire, not water. Water is maybe the most ubiquitous and the biggest thing, but it started with fire in the 50s. That's where the first original insurance policies were. And so I remember the day in May of 2008 when Rusty was the president of RIA, and he announced at the Leadership Summit in Baltimore that the pins were pulled for RIA to move forward a fire standard. And his exact words were, we're going to take what's ours, or something along those lines. And he expressed some of those viewpoints in his opening comments about why it was important that we move forward the RIA we had the expertise in that area. That was also the last physical meeting at RIA that Marty King ever attended. Tommy Yacobelis was actually in the room at that time, but he was there really because he was the president of IEQA and he got a special invite. So that's the early history of how the fire standard started. The next thing that was very important was in 2010, there was a meeting in Dallas, and Patty Harmon is on the call and who has had unbelievable amounts of work behind the scenes and involved for the last 15 years on all of this stuff. Three people, there was a meeting, And that was the beginning that actually led to the FS1 and the FS2, where Mike, when he raised his hand, he said, "I know this is really stupid, but I'll volunteer to be the chair." And anybody who knows Mike can kind of appreciate that. So there's another document that's been out there for years that often does not talk about, and it's this. This is the first thing on fire that came out in 2012. This was a joint ANSI standard between IESO, which was basically owned or under the auspices IAQA and RIA. And I remember the year before, Bran made a comment that Tommy Yacobelis did it in record time. He's known for doing that. This ANSI document was the first one that ISO put out. It was turned around in 18 months and it went through the review. It's a skinny document. It gets right to the point. It's 20 some odd pages, but 5 or 6 of those pages are chain of custody and forms and things of that nature. And it had an interesting group of people that were on there. A lot of ASHRAE people, because it had to basically do with HVAC. But Bob Baker, of course, Tommy, Danny Greenblatt, Carl Grimes, Patty obviously was involved. Laurie Street, who was she was a PhD type who did testing in labs. Davidge Warfield and Tommy. And anyway, it was co-branded. And it's an interesting document. The name of it is long. It's called the ISO RIA Standard 6001 for the evaluation of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, HVAC interior surfaces to determine the presence of fire-related particulates as a result of a fire in a structure. The short term, what they called it was either the soot standard or the char standard. And the reason they called it that was because that was the marker that they looked at to determine whether the residues inside a hard surface of a duct was from the fire or not. So it was not only used to qualify the initial scope, but also used in some clearance capacity. Did they do thorough enough cleaning afterwards? And the reason that this was an important thing, and Tommy came to me, I remember at the time I was involved in working as a consultant with the RIA. They came to me at an IAQA convention, and they wanted RIA because we were the experts on smoke. And I remember for all the years that Tommy was in the NATCA, and he was very involved in doing the duct cleaning standard, when they went to do firework, once he was absorbed, his duct busters was part of the Belfour group. He said a lot of contractors he knew for years, they followed no standard in cleaning duct work, including their own NACA standards, because fires were different. And that's what just got Tommy up in a roar, and why this document was developed the greatest standard. So that's really the early roots. And then the FS1, when those discussed in 2010, some of this methodology from this document was discussed. It could be used for testing smoke surfaces on hard surfaces. We don't need to discuss whether there's a difference between wildfire and smoke. And I don't think all smoke is the same. There are differences. But anyway, I think that's some history that probably was important. Anyway, to kind of wrap up, the other thing that was brought up were the time frames and all of this stuff. It's not unusual that it takes this long to do these things. All the original S500s before ANSI took at least a minimum of 5 years, even the reviews. And then after it became ANSI, a lot of those things take a long time. If somebody wants to talk about how long it takes, anyone that's familiar with ASHRAE, and certainly Don Weeks and people like that are on this call are, the ASHRAE 62 standard went on for years. And I don't know how many reviews that went on. And that was all about how much air should be taken into a building, as part of air exchange. And the big discussion there was, should the standards be technical standards, or should there be what they called soft or emotional language in there, which is indoor air quality stuff, which was the battle, because ASHRAE at the heart of it is a technical organization, as is IICRC. That's the core of it. So with closing, Mr. Zlotnik, you talk about Florida in the 2-day, the 1-day course. It's actually a 2-day course in Texas, Louisiana, Florida. They were the original mold things. But, California also has a designation called REA for years, which stands for Registered Environmental Assessor. And there are people like Pat Moffett, Peter Sir, John Bant, a lot of people like that who've actually had that designation for years, which is a kind of a state thing. Last thing I'd like to say is this, that those 9 principles I think are terrific, that the guys reviewed. But really, the Marty King and the other less recognized founder of fire restoration, was Major Long, good friend of Cliff's of mine, past president of RIA also. I asked them one time, how would you simply define fire restoration? And this is what they said. They said it's the process of identifying residues and surfaces. Identify what the residue is and the surface that it attaches to. Then you come up with the least intensive procedure to remove the residue from the surface and restore it back to its nearly original state, which is the pure essence of the word restoration. And that, in the simplest form, in my mind, is probably how our industry started. And all the training, a lot of that stuff is in the courses. It was in the original CR course that Marty did. And that's kind of about as simple as it gets. So anyway, with that, I'll pass it back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Pete. I also want to thank this week's guests, Bran Lynch, John Pletcher, Mark Springer, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnik, special guest co-host Rusty Amarante. Thanks, guys. We appreciate y'all joining us. I also want to thank Grayson, gone fishing. Going to be going crazy with edits this afternoon, but we'll keep you busy, Grayson, and just keep putting hours down on that clock. And also want to thank our loyal audience, sponsors. We'll be back next Friday at noon with the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.